Story 1. I went to a pretty ordinary high school, though it wasn't one of those classic suburban ones you see in movies. It was in a more rural area, surrounded by quiet neighborhoods and farmland. Some people go to massive schools with graduating classes of 500 or even 1,000 students. My high school was much smaller. I think my graduating class had just under 200 people. It was the kind of school where even if you weren't close friends with someone, you still recognized them and probably knew their name. Walking through the halls, you'd easily know almost everyone in your grade. Since our town was peaceful and slow-paced, there were hardly ever any big stories or major events that made the local news. Life there was pretty calm. After school, we'd hang out by playing sports, riding bikes, or just walking around town. That was about 17 years ago, so I'm sure things have changed a lot for kids today. One thing I always thought was unusual about my high school was how little real bullying there was. You never saw the stereotypical movie-type bullying. No kids getting shoved into lockers or having their lunches stolen. Thinking back now, I can't name a single person in my class who could truly be called a bully. Sure, there was the usual teasing that happens everywhere, but it was rarely cruel. We had a few quiet students, as every school does, but there was one guy in particular who stood out because he almost never spoke to anyone. For the sake of this story, I'll call him Luke. Luke wasn't strange-looking or anything like that. He seemed normal enough, and if someone took the time to talk to him, he came across as polite. I had one class with him, an elective that included students from all 4 grades. Luke and I were juniors when this took place. The class was a computer elective, and back then, the computer lab still had those bulky box monitors that took up half the desk. I still remember exactly how the room looked. There was a central aisle dividing 2 long rows of tables, each side having 4 rows with 4 computers per row. Each student had their own station. The class wasn't completely full. Maybe 26 of the 32 seats were taken. Luke always sat in the second row on the far left, with no one beside him. Everyone else sat near their friends or classmates. Unfortunately, not long after the semester began, a few seniors in that class started picking on Luke. They didn't hurt him physically, but they would make fun of how quiet he was. They joked that it was creepy when the teacher asked him questions and he didn't respond. For whatever reason, our teacher never told them to stop. She was a bit timid. Maybe that's why she didn't intervene. As the weeks went by, things got worse. I remember once seeing a small, crumpled piece of paper fly across the room and hit the back of Luke's head. He turned around, and the look on his face said it all. One of the seniors quickly said, "Wasn't me," and pointed to someone else. Luke just looked tired and hurt, a mix of anger and sadness in his eyes. I honestly felt bad, but I didn't step in. One afternoon after school, I saw Luke sitting alone on the curb near the parking lot. I was heading to my car and noticed him just sitting there, staring at the ground. I had started driving that year, since I was one of the older students in our grade. Knowing that not many kids lived within walking distance, I asked if he needed a ride home. His face brightened instantly when I offered. We walked to my car, and he gave me directions to his house. It was about a 10-minute drive. During that short trip, we actually talked quite a bit. I told him to ignore the seniors and that they weren't worrying about. He said it wasn't just them. Apparently, he was getting picked on in other classes too. That really made me feel awful for him. In those 10 minutes, I got a glimpse of who he was, and he seemed like a decent, thoughtful guy. When I dropped him off, I commented on how close we lived to each other, and he smiled a little before saying goodbye. After that, we'd exchange quick hellos in class, but I still never had the courage to speak up when people mocked him. Then one day, Luke didn't show up to computer class. It was 4th period. Later that day, during 7th period English, an announcement came over the loudspeaker. "Lockdown. This is not a drill." Everyone froze. Our teacher immediately turned off the lights and told us to move to the corner of the room. Seeing how scared she looked made everyone else even more anxious. We sat there in silence for what felt like forever, probably 20 or 30 minutes, until the intercom crackled again. The principal's voice came on, explaining that someone wearing a mask and carrying a black duffel bag had been seen trying to get into the school. Because our school had strong security, the doors were locked the moment that person was spotted. Police arrived quickly, and the rest of the school day was canceled once everything was secured. It was a Friday, and I remember going home with a couple of friends to hang out and try to shake off the nerves. The details after that are blurry, but that night I woke up suddenly to a faint tapping sound on my window. When I looked, I saw someone standing outside. My heart started pounding. Before I ran to get my dad, I leaned in a little closer, trying to see who it was. Then I heard a voice quietly say my name. It was Luke. I felt a wave of dread hit me. I barely opened the window and whispered, "What are you doing here? How did you find me?" And through the glass, he said softly, "I tried to do something bad." That was the moment everything made sense. I mean it. The moment he said those words, it instantly connected in my mind. Before he could even continue, I asked him straight out if he was the reason for the lockdown earlier that day. He paused for a second and then quietly said yes. I was too afraid to ask him what exactly he had planned to do. Instead, I asked how he managed to find where I lived. He told me he remembered me mentioning a small deli near my house during our earlier conversation, and that he had biked around that area until he spotted my car parked nearby. That explanation didn't make the situation feel any better. The fact that he had gone to that much effort to track me down made everything much more unsettling. Luke then asked if he could come inside so we could talk about what he was planning to do. I told him no. I said I could not let him into my house, and I did not want to know what he was about to do at school. I suggested that he should go straight to the police or the school and turn himself in. When he refused to move away from my window, I raised my voice and shouted for my dad. That seemed to scare him, and he ran off into the dark. I went straight to my parents' room and woke them up. My mom was the first to react, and she insisted that we call the police right away. She was visibly shaken and could barely keep her voice steady. When a police officer finally arrived, I had no choice but to tell the truth. I gave them Luke's name and explained everything that had just happened. I told them that he had come to my window in the middle of the night and admitted that he had nearly done something terrible at our school. The officer said they were already aware of the lockdown and that they had been investigating. They sent officers to Luke's home that night, but after speaking with his parents, they discovered he wasn't there. The next day, word spread that Luke had either come back home on his own or had been found by police who were already waiting for him. He reportedly confessed to what he had told me that night. From what people in our class later heard, Luke was charged with something along the lines of making a terroristic threat. I know he spent some time in custody, and I know he was eventually released years ago. To be honest, I have no idea where he is now or what became of him. Part of me still feels a small bit of sympathy for him, knowing how isolation and constant teasing can break someone down over time. He came to me because I was probably the only person who had ever shown him even a small amount of kindness. That thought has always stuck with me. But the truth is, he admitted to coming to school wearing a mask and carrying a gun. Even though he never said he intended to actually use it, I could never convince myself that he brought those things just to scare people. Deep down, I think he really had a plan in mind, but at the last moment, guilt or fear made him stop. I can only hope that somewhere along the way, Luke got the help he so badly needed. Story 2. This happened in 2016, back when I was in 5th grade. If you remember that year, you probably remember the wave of creepy clown sightings that were happening all across the country. It was all over the news and social media for weeks. Most adults thought it was nothing more than a silly prank or a passing trend. But for kids like us, it was actually pretty terrifying. That day started out completely normal. I went to an elementary school in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the same area where I still live today. Nothing strange ever really happened there. It was around 1 in the afternoon, I think, since it was getting close to the end of the school day. Our class was working quietly on some random worksheet, and the only sounds were a few whispers between classmates. Then, out of nowhere, one of the girls in my class suddenly yelled, "There's a clown outside." Her voice was so high-pitched that it startled everyone. A few of us got up to look toward the windows, and sure enough, there really was a clown standing there. He was only a few feet away from the glass, facing our classroom directly. He was wearing an oversized, dirty red and yellow clown suit and had white face paint with dark circles around his eyes. His grin looked fake and wide, like something out of a horror movie. He stood there staring straight at us, not moving, until he slowly started waving. Some kids laughed, thinking it was a joke, but others were clearly frightened. Our teacher, Mrs. Riker, walked to the window, looked at him for a moment, and said loudly through the glass, "Excuse me, classes are in session. You need to leave." The clown didn't respond. He just stayed there, grinning and waving. Mrs. Riker told everyone to sit back down and said she was going to call the front office. She picked up the classroom phone, which had one of those cords that reached the doorway, and stepped into the hallway while speaking quietly. A minute later, she came back in, hung up the phone, and walked straight to the window. She saw that the clown was still standing there, doing the same creepy slow wave. Without saying anything, she quickly pulled the blinds shut. Not even 2 minutes later, the principal's voice came over the loudspeaker. "Staff, please get your classrooms into lockdown formation." The tone in her voice made it clear that it was not a drill. You could hear the urgency, though she was clearly trying not to scare the younger kids. That was when everything became real. Mrs. Riker turned off the lights, told us all to crawl under our desks, and locked the door. The room went silent. A few students tried to whisper or laugh, but most of us were too scared to move. We stayed like that for what felt like hours, but it was really about 30 minutes. No one knew what was going on, and the silence made it worse. Finally, the principal's voice returned, saying the lockdown was over and that the situation had been taken care of. She said school security had confirmed the clown had left. They didn't tell us anything else. The rest of the day went on like normal, but it felt tense and strange. Everyone whispered about it when the bell rang for dismissal, but the teachers avoided talking about it. After school, I was walking home with my friend Chris. We lived a few streets away from each other, so we usually walked together. As we were passing the back of the school, a couple of girls from our grade suddenly ran past us, looking panicked. One of them shouted, "There's someone in the woods." We turned around and looked toward the small patch of trees behind the school. It wasn't a real forest, just a thin strip of woods separating the playground from the next road. Standing just beyond the trees, half hidden by the branches, was the same clown. He was wearing the same dirty suit, the same makeup, and the same smile. He was waving again, but not at random this time. He was doing it slowly and deliberately, pointing his wave toward the girls who had just run by, like he was trying to get their attention. Chris and I froze for a moment, and we bolted. We didn't even look back. I ran straight home and told my parents everything as soon as I got through the door. They called the school immediately, and later I heard from another classmate that the police had come again to search the area. It patrolled for a while, but never found anyone. Nobody ever figured out who that person was. To this day, I don't know if the clown was just trying to scare kids or if he was planning something worse. What still makes my skin crawl is knowing that after the lockdown ended, he came back. He hid in the trees, quietly watching the kids walk home. Story 3. This happened not too long ago. I live on the outskirts of Philadelphia with my son and my stepdaughter. I say stepdaughter because I legally adopted my best friend's daughter after what happened years ago. Back in 2016, my best friend Joanne was murdered by her husband. That case made national news, and it later came out that he had been connected to 5 other murders. He was convicted and sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms with no chance of parole. Since then, I've been raising her daughter as my own. I work as a middle school teacher at the same school my son attends. He's 1 grade below the one I teach, and my stepdaughter is 1 grade above, so both of their classrooms are close to mine. The incident I'm about to describe happened on March 30th, 2020, right around the time schools were beginning to close because of the pandemic. Our school is in a fairly isolated area. The nearest other school is about 10 miles away. The closest gas station is 2 miles, and the nearest park is roughly 600 meters from campus. Because of how far we were from town, we were one of the last schools in the district to go into lockdown. It was a warm Monday afternoon, around midday. I was in the middle of teaching math to my 6th grade class when I got a strange notification on my phone. It said someone had arrived to pick up my stepdaughter. Our school's security system alerts parents or guardians if someone comes to collect their child, so I immediately checked the details. My stepdaughter's classroom was only 3 doors down from mine, and she didn't have any appointments scheduled that day. No relatives lived nearby either. Something felt very wrong. I replied through the system that I was already at school and that no one should be there to pick her up. The office messaged back saying the person claiming to pick her up was her biological father. That made my heart sink. The school did not have any record of him listed in her file because of the adoption and court restrictions. The office assistant on the line said she would contact the principal right away and find out what to do. My instincts were screaming that something wasn't right. I quickly called my stepdaughter's classroom and asked the teacher to send her to me. She arrived a few minutes later, and I told her to sit quietly in the back of my class. Not even 10 minutes passed before the lockdown alarm started blaring. I instructed my students to push desks against the door, close the blinds, and stay down. Everyone moved quickly and quietly to the corner of the room. At that point, I already had a terrible feeling about who this lockdown might involve. We remained in that position for about 45 minutes before the situation started to calm down. The tension in the room was thick, and I was doing my best to keep everyone still and calm. When the lockdown was finally lifted about 2 hours later, police officers escorted me out of the building. They questioned me about my connection to the man involved, since my name was listed on the child's CPS records. I explained everything, how I had taken in my best friend's daughter after her mother was killed, and how her father was the one who had committed the murder. The police then told me how he had managed to escape. A transport bus moving inmates between facilities had been struck by a car that swerved into it on the road. The crash killed 10 prisoners instantly, injured 2 guards, and allowed 20 inmates to escape. Officers had already been stationed at our home, anticipating that her father might go there first. When they heard that our school had gone into lockdown, they immediately suspected one of the escapees had come to the area. Fortunately, they responded fast enough to keep anything from happening. I still think about that day often. The thought of what might have happened if my stepdaughter had not been sent to my classroom still makes me uneasy. Another incident from my past also comes to mind sometimes. Story 4. It happened during my freshman year of high school. I'm 21 now, but that memory has stuck with me. I attended a regular public school in a typical suburban town. We used to have lockdown drills every couple of months, so when it started that day, I assumed it was just another practice. It was a Wednesday, 4th period. I remember because it was Earth Science class, and we had just finished a quick pop quiz. I was packing my notebook into my backpack when the loudspeaker crackled to life, and a voice said, "This is a lockdown. Lock all doors, lights off, stay quiet." At first, Nobody really reacted. We all thought it was another drill. Our teacher, Mrs. Chun, let out a sigh, stood up, and locked the door like she always did during drills. She switched off the lights and told everyone to move to the far corner of the room, away from the door. Most of the students were still giggling and whispering, thinking it was another routine exercise. Then another announcement came on. The same voice, but this time it sounded different. Rushed. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. The room went dead silent. Mrs. Chun didn't say a single word. She just motioned with her hand for us to stay down and remain quiet. You could see the worry on her face. She kept glancing at her phone, and faint police sirens could be heard in the distance. A few minutes passed before we heard something in the hallway. Footsteps. Slow ones. Not the kind that sound like police or a teacher. Just one person walking at a steady pace. The steps stopped right outside our classroom door. Everyone stared in that direction. No one dared to breathe. Then came a soft knock. 3 times. Knock, 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 knock. It was not loud, but slow and deliberate. Nobody moved. Then the doorknob began to turn. It was locked, of course, but the person on the other side kept testing it, turning it back and forth like they were checking to see if it would open. Then a man's voice said, "This is just a drill. You can open the door now." We all looked at Mrs. Chun. She put her finger to her lips and shook her head, silently telling us no. The man kept knocking and trying the handle again and again. The knocks became louder, more impatient. He started saying, "Hello," over and over. Our classroom was on the first floor in the science wing, and I was shaking so hard I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. Even though everyone tried to stay brave, I knew we were all terrified. Then, at last, the noise stopped. There was complete silence for several minutes, except for the sirens outside, which were getting louder. It felt like time had slowed down. Then someone screamed from down the hall. A girl's voice. Just one scream, and then nothing else. A few of the girls in my class began crying quietly. Someone whispered that they saw a shadow move past the small glass window on our door more than once. Each time anyone tried to whisper, Mrs. Chun would quietly but firmly hush them. 5 or 10 minutes passed before we finally heard police shouting from the hallway, telling everyone to stay put. They were going room by room. When they finally reached us and unlocked the door with a key, Mrs. Chun didn't move until they held up their badges. We were led out in a single line, passing other classes doing the same. Outside, there were flashing lights everywhere, and even a SWAT van parked by the entrance. I didn't see much, but I did catch sight of an officer leading a handcuffed man out of the building. He looked around 30, definitely not a student, with long pale hair and dark clothes. Later that day, we learned that a criminal had sneaked into the school through a side door that was open during a delivery. That door was at the end of the science wing. Apparently, he was mentally unstable and carrying something in his backpack, though they never said what it was. The school only told us no one was hurt and that the situation was under control. But I will never forget that knock. The sound of the doorknob turning. The scream from down the hall. It didn't feel like things were under control at all. Story 5. I had just started high school, and already I had a lockdown story of my own. I'm only 15, a sophomore at Northside High School in Jacksonville, North Carolina. That morning, I got to school early, around 6:55 a.m. I was one of the first in my first period class, which was chorus. Our room was at the far end of the fine arts hallway, next to the auditorium. I sat at my desk, listening to music on my phone, waiting for the bell to ring. A few minutes later, I heard my teacher say something, so I pulled out my headphones. When I looked up, I saw my classmates heading into the storage closet at the back of the room. I was confused. We had just practiced a lockdown drill the day before, so I didn't know if this was another one or not. Still, I followed everyone and went inside. The teacher shut the door and turned off the lights, leaving us in total darkness, except for a little light under the door. I didn't know what was going on until I heard police sirens outside. That was when I realized it was real. My nerves started to kick in, but I forced myself to stay calm. I figured that panicking would only make it worse. I sat quietly, listening for any sound from outside, but there was nothing. We stayed in that closet until the lockdown ended at about 8:45 a.m. Almost 2 hours. When we finally came out, everyone was relieved. The calmness of my classmates helped me keep it together too. I went back to my desk near the front of the classroom and put my headphones in again, trying to calm down and pretend things were normal. After a while, I decided to ask my teacher what had really happened. I asked, "Were there any fights today?" She looked at me with a serious expression and said, "It's much worse." That was when it hit me that something terrible had really taken place. I looked out the window and saw a line of cars in the back parking lot. At first, I thought it was the usual end-of-day pickup, but something about it felt wrong. Inside the classroom, some students were whispering and trying to get updates on what was going on. My friend Jacob finally told me that someone had been stabbed in the center of the school, near the rotunda. I didn't know any details yet, but soon after, my mom texted me asking if I was okay. I told her I was safe in my choir class. A few girls in the room started crying after the lockdown ended, which made the whole situation feel even more real. Then my mom called me. She said she was parked near the baseball field, where a lot of other parents were waiting anxiously to see their kids. After a while, my name was called, and I was allowed to leave. I walked out to the field and found my mom. She was shaken and looked terrified. Honestly, so was I. She drove me straight to the daycare where she worked, and once we got there, we went into a quiet back room and both broke down crying. Some of her coworkers came in to comfort us, and after a while, I had to step outside to get some air. I put my headphones back in and listened to 3 Days Grace, just to steady my nerves. Later that day, we learned the full story. 2 students had been rushed to the hospital, and one of them didn't make it. A teacher had also been injured trying to stop the attack. Altogether, 3 people were hurt. I looked up the news online and saw a press conference about the stabbing already posted. After watching it, my mom took me to Arby's because I hadn't eaten since that morning. We got some food, and then we went to pick up my younger brother from his middle school. He said he had noticed a lot of police around the area, but didn't know why. When we finally got home, I started searching online again for more updates. That's when I saw that a 16-year-old had been charged with voluntary manslaughter, assault with a deadly weapon, and several other serious charges. 2 more students, both around the same age, were also charged with assault and disorderly conduct. The most disturbing thing was that someone had recorded the stabbing and posted the video on Snapchat. I never watched it myself, but my mom told me about it. She said the person recording was running, so the camera was mostly pointed toward the floor, but you could still hear kids screaming in the background as it happened. My mom believes the whole thing was connected to gang violence, and after hearing that, I was scared all over again. Scared that there might be revenge or another act of violence, another attack, more chaos. It's hard to accept that someone actually lost their life. I didn't even know the victim, but the thought of what happened still stays with me. I hope that poor kid found peace